Whenever I tell my friends about Terminator Resistance, I find out that they have never heard of it. I was the same until recently, until I found it by pure luck. It was released at the end of 2019, so it's barely a year old, and yet I just assumed it was some really old game that I had missed. When you consider that it's a game based on a movie, one can be expected to be skeptical. Almost every such game is terrible. The thing is, Terminator Resistance is a first-person shooter with RPG elements, which fits chronologically within the timeline of the first two Terminator movies and focuses on what happened in the future, which the movies barely scratch on. I realize that the last sentence may sound confusing, but if you have watched the Terminator movies, and particularly 1 and 2, you will know what I mean. To everyone else, please go watch the first two Terminator movies and then watch this review afterwards. So as I was saying, the game focuses on the good movies and goes one step further. It tells a story which is canonically tied to those movies, meaning that it actually expands the lore. Clearly, if you consider yourself even a minor fan of the Terminator movies, this information will have piqued your interest. I know it did mine. But before we get to the meat of the game, let's first quickly talk about its support of ultra-wide resolutions. In short, it all works great. Not only can you set variable resolutions, but you even have a generous field of view slider, helping you adapt the game to your preferences. This is how it should always be. Well done with that, Taeyeon. With that being said, I want to go back to the point I made earlier. No one has heard of this game. This is mostly due to the fact that it's essentially a low budget title. Corners had to be cut and marketing was clearly one of them. Usually voice acting and graphics are some of the main things that suffer when the budget is limited. I'm happy to say that every character, including our protagonist, are voiced. The acting is far from the best, but it does what it has to. I'm generally pretty tolerant of mediocre voice acting in games which revolve around military conflicts or other similar extreme situations, simply because I don't expect soldiers to sound like Troy Baker and Laura Bailey. Don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily mind if they do, but if they sound bland, that's also okay. It's been a while since I last watched the movies, but I am pretty sure that some of the music is straight from those films, and that's awesome. I did get a bit annoyed by the combat theme, which would play whenever an enemy engages you, but that's mostly because I chose to often use stealth, which means that if I am ever noticed the combat theme would immediately play, I would hide, the theme would stop, then I would try again, and because I sometimes suck, everything would repeat. You get the idea. In addition to that, you have the option to also hack different types of turrets around the map, and if those turrets actually encounter an enemy, even if you're not close, the combat theme would play again, because essentially you are in combat since this is your turret. So I would walk around and suddenly hear doom 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 doom, you know, the combat theme playing, and then it would just stop because the turret killed whatever is approaching it. Let's talk a bit about the graphics of the game. It looks dated, although I got used to it quite quickly, and since we are playing during an apocalypse, the dark colors and grim mood actually give the developer a good excuse to use less appealing visuals. This is one of the areas where they saved some money and effort, but it does come at a price. First of all, there were some serious graphical glitches which accompanied me throughout the game. Just take a look at this. This is the first one, and it had some kind of strange texture clipping that was going on. I'm not sure how to describe it. You can see it. It would make it look as though the ground moves up as you approach it, or rather moves down. It depends. It's quite noticeable in some areas, but luckily won't be as extreme as you see it in this clip. This is one of the more extreme examples. It seems to happen much more when you're passing some kind of a ditch or something like that. Another issue I noticed was that the lighting would glitch out as well. You will have flickering illumination as you move. I've seen this in other games as well, and as far as I remember, there were settings that actually caused this, meaning that changing them would make it go away, but to be honest, I didn't mind it since it wouldn't appear too often, and in the end it wasn't as disturbing to me. I kind of just ignored it. I could have googled and I'm pretty sure I would have found a solution for it, but nah, screw it, it wasn't that bad. But still, it's there and some people will be very annoyed by it. Another point at which money was obviously saved was motion capture, and I mean that there is none of it in this game. The characters are animated as good as possible, but unfortunately still look very stiff. The same counts for their faces. This is yet another aspect of the game which bothered me a bit, but then I sort of got used to it. It's also where I want to explain something about my evaluation of games. When a game is released by an unknown studio with a very limited budget, I actually tend to cut these guys some slack. My expectations are much higher when I look at a AAA title by a major studio, for example. When you think of the first Witcher game, it was a mess. Lots of bugs, ugly graphics, super long loading screens all over the place, but then most people looked deeper and saw that it was kind of a good game, plagued by the developers' lack of resources and experience. A few games later, and we have Cyberpunk 2077, which is still ridiculously buggy and poorly optimized, but will be fixed in due time and then be a masterpiece. I'm convinced of that, although I don't have the game yet, since my GPU simply can't handle such a game at the moment, let alone allow me to record it. But I am still confident that when I live to get a new GPU and the game is playable in the distant future for me, I will have a fantastic time with it, mainly because it's a game similar to Deus Ex and stuff like that, and actually kind of similar to this one as well, although obviously on a much grander scale. And I just kind of love this sort of gameplay, story, everything. So I'm very biased. I have huge expectations and they're not based on just the publicity that I've seen so far. But back to the point at hand here. What I'm trying to say is that a small developer can grow to be huge if given a chance and more tolerant evaluation. And so when it comes to Terminator Resistance, I am a bit more lenient for some of the things that are mostly caused by lack of experience and especially lack of money. So far we've concluded that the audio and visual presentation absolutely nailed the atmosphere of the first two movies, which is a huge plus, although like I said, the video could be much better in pretty much every aspect. However, none of that will matter if the game is bad in terms of gameplay. So let's look at that next. At its core, this game is a first-person shooter with RPG elements. You fire weapons, throw grenades, and even use a few melee weapons in your fight against the machines. If I had to compare this game to another one, and I kinda did, I would think of Deus Ex or the Fallout games. You level up, you upgrade your skills, craft, use different tools, and traverse relatively open levels, which allows you to play around and experiment. Do you want to take down Terminators while being stealthy? You got it. Do you want to hack turrets and have them take down the Terminators for you? Go ahead. Do you want to bust through the main door, sneak through some vents, or straight out blow up a weakened wall and enter from there? How about picking a lock or hacking a console to open a path? Have it your way. It's all here in this game. And speaking of hacking, you know how all of these games seem to always have the same lockpicking minigame but different hacking ones? I mean, if you compare things like Deus Ex, for example, Fallout, and this one, well, here it's essentially a version of Frogger. Yes, the lockpicking itself is just like in Skyrim and Fallout, literally the same, but the hacking is quite different here. You get to play Frogger, and you have to try to pass from one end of the screen to the other one with a checkpoint in between. I found it to be pretty cool and entertaining for the most part. It also didn't take too long. Higher levels of hacking offer obstacles, and in case you are too lazy for it, you can try to brute force the hack by using up a weapon upgrade chip, which I haven't talked about yet, but it's essentially a relatively rare component that you get from Terminators and which can be used to upgrade your plasma rifles. It's a game which not only rewards you for doing side quests, and yes, there are side quests obviously, but also for exploring in general. And the maps are designed to inspire exploration. Not only could you find something cool in the ruins of our civilization, but you could also find a letter left by someone documenting their final hours or some other interesting piece of lore. This sort of gameplay is my absolute favorite one. That's why I'm so excited about Cyberpunk as well, because I know it's going to be like that. Couple that with the futuristic weapons which you can upgrade with the chips as I've mentioned, and you have over 15 hours of pure fun in front of you, depending on, of course, how much you explore. In addition to that, the game offers you the option to develop relationships with some of your friends from the camp. Doing this may seem trivial, but it will play a major role when it comes to the final hours of the game and its endings. That's right, you have multiple endings here. Last but not least, our protagonist is also offered the possibility to have sex with two of the women you can develop a relationship with. This actually adds to the game's connection to the movies because it is part of the story and will create a better bond between the player and these characters. Obviously, I don't want to spoil the game, so I'm not going to tell you much about the story, but another part where it actually fits is that they are, and I mean by that the sex scenes, designed to look a lot like the sex scene between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor. There's nothing graphic here, nothing explicit, but at the same time the downside is that those scenes are also where the lack of motion capturing becomes the most apparent. Looks a bit like our protagonist is having sex with a sex doll, but that can be forgiven. There are a few other issues I haven't addressed yet. First of all, the game has several useless mechanics. One of them is your option to perform melee attacks, and I don't mean the stealth takedowns by by that. No, you can actually just swing with some kind of a pipe. This ability is absolutely pointless. It only works on the weakest enemies of all enemies, and even then it barely does anything. I have no idea why they even implemented this into the game. You will never want to use this after your first try. The second problem is your flashlight. Well, this mechanic actually has some kind of utility in the game. It's made obsolete by your night vision goggles, which we get from the start. So it's not like we have to use the flashlight for a while. No, we get the night vision early on, immediately as a matter of fact. So the flashlight's absolutely pointless. The night vision not only shows you everything quite well in terms of illumination, but it also enables you to see enemies through walls, making even loot easier to find. I never used the flashlight, and you will not either. And as for the night vision, it's so useful in fact that I feel like it should have been nerfed a bit, perhaps by giving it some sort of battery gauge. The reason being that I found myself using it way too often. It's a huge help, and the only drawback when using it is that you move slowly. I had to actually actively stop myself from constantly engaging it, because the game would have been mostly played in this green color at slow motion, more or less, because of your slow movement, that is. I'm kind of a guy who does that a lot. I have the same problem with useful vision types in other games. I remember playing Batman Arkham Asylum. I would constantly go with the vision thinking that I might find a secret or something. And speaking of colors, I both love and hate how the weapon scopes are all red with thread vision on them. The color is really nasty, but at the same time it does fit the Terminator movie canon, since these weapons are designed by Skynet and also generally supposed to be used by Terminators. Something that really bothered me was that you encounter multiple dogs in the game, but you cannot pet them. I mean, come on, this is 2021. Let us pet the good boys and girls. One of the less known things about the game is that some covers are destructible. And I say less known simply because it is almost never a factor anyway. You need explosives to destroy these covers, and most enemies only use plasma weapons, so your cover is pretty safe. While you will almost never see a point in destroying any cover, simply because the enemy units rush you and don't care about using cover in any way whatsoever, the only time I found it to be useful, and that was as a matter of fact when I noticed that it's a thing at all, was during a boss fight with a prototype Terminator who was smarter and actually used cover. You can see it on your screen. There is something annoying I forgot to mention, by the way. Within the game's second act, you're given new night vision goggles which have a camera function. Basically, the game wants you to take pictures of enemy units and you receive some experience for that. The problems with that are, well, many. First, you cannot take pictures of defeated enemies, which in all fairness does make some sense, because that would be like sneaking into a Lamborghini construction facility, blowing up one of the cars and then taking pictures of it, hoping that your engineers can steal some of the technologies. It would be pretty much the same if you take a picture of a destroyed Terminator. But the second problem is where I got really frustrated. There are different quality levels of a taken picture, and getting a higher level depends absolutely on arbitrary factors. One enemy could be photographed from 10 meters away and give you a perfect picture. Another one you might stand 1 meter away from and they might be facing you and you'd still get a terrible picture. I actually googled, and people are uncertain. They give different types of advice and it works for some enemies, but it would appear that you need to be really specific. For example, one type of enemy you need to be on its right end. It's just crazy. I actually failed one side quest which wanted a perfect picture of a Terminator. I wasted half an hour kiting two of them, taking pictures from any angle and any distance you can think of. It never worked. In the end, I got frustrated and just destroyed those walking tin cans and moved on. While the game informed me that the quest had failed, I felt like I won that time. There's something positive that I forgot to mention. The game's loading speed. Levels are loaded really quickly. I mean, we have to also account for the fact that I am using an SSD with this, but still the loading screens are few and far apart, and when they do occur, I've noticed that they lasted around 2 to 3 seconds on average, which is great. It's awesome actually. And before we move to my conclusion, I want to also praise the game's leveling system. The pace at which you level up is designed really well, and I had all the skills I wanted as I reached the final chapters of the game, giving me enough time to get used to them. You won't be able to unlock all of them, so you have to commit to some of them, but most of them, let's say 80%, will be yours and maxed out. And that's really good. It felt like the game was rewarding me appropriately without being too generous or too stingy, and I appreciate that. And now let's talk about the game's free DLC that came with it. It's called Infiltrator Mode. It's a short one, but really sweet since you get to play as an actual T-800 Terminator and you're gonna have a ton of fun. You're supposed to walk around the map, kill any humans in your way, and gather intel. The ultimate goal is to reach the commander of a local resistance and eliminate him, which takes around 45 minutes to do. It's also where many fans have found several Easter eggs in addition to the many Easter eggs that can be found within the main game. So if you want to explore and look for that kind of stuff, this is the right game for you. In conclusion, if I have to give a short description of this game, I would call it a hidden gem. I had a lot of fun playing it, not only because it actually respects the source material and expands it really well, but it also helps you understand the first two movies better because it ties so well into them. It basically shows you exactly the stuff that's supposed to happen parallel to what is happening in those movies, and it all clicks. The atmosphere is great, its fun and multifaceted gameplay is a must play for people who enjoy games such as Deus Ex Human Revolution and the FPS versions of Fallout, except the 76 obviously, as well as for people who are generally fans of the two Terminator movies. And if you should happen to be basically a combination of both these categories I just mentioned, then you, my friend, will have a blast with this title. I know I did. Terminator Resistance is underrated, and I personally think it's a shame more people don't know of its existence, so I hope my video reaches a few of them and perhaps motivates them to give it a shot. The game currently costs only €24 on both GOG and Steam and is more than worth the asking price. As I always do, I want to remind my viewers of my Patreon page on which I publish links to free games, so go check it out from time to time. You'll find the link to it in the description of this video. There are a ton of free games out there and I got your back when it comes to getting them. With that being said, thank you so much for watching my video and I hope to see you on the next one. This is Nino signing off.